He said he was protecting the neighborhood. That was the first lie. It was just another quiet evening in a place where nothing dramatic was supposed to happen. Trimmed lawns, warm porch lights, kids riding bikes before dinner.
Who's
the
losing?
kind
Look!
of street where people
Stay back!
argue about
Don't
trash
closer!
cans,
We have
not
to go in now!
handcuffs.
I
And yet,
didn't do
in the middle
anything!
of that calm,
Who's losing?
a
Look!
man in a black
Stay back!
tactical
Don't
vest
closer! We have to
stepped
go in
into our
now!
driveway with a badge that did not belong to him and a confidence that was not earned. My wife thought it was a joke at first, until he grabbed her wrist. You do not forget the sound of metal closing around someone you love.
The court finds the defendant guilty on all counts.
You do not forget the way
this can't be
confusion
happening.
turns into fear in someone's eyes when they realize this is not a misunderstanding. This is escalation.
Order in the court. Any for the
He said
disruption
it
will
was
be
an
met with
HOA
contempt
enforcement
charges.
action. He said he had authority. He said she was being detained. Detained for what?
Let's review these metrics.
Parking in her
I
own
suggest we
driveway?
optimize the supply
Questioning
chain.
a warning letter?
Agreed. That could boost
Existing
margins.
without bowing? Neighbors came outside, slowly
My
at
fellow
first,
challenges, we stand
then
at a
all
pivotal
once,
moment. The
phones
challenges we
raised,
face demand our
whispers
immediate
spreading
unified
like
action.
wildfire across
Together we will
perfect
overcome them.
green lawns. And in that moment, the neighborhood stopped being a community and turned into an audience. The flashing red and blue lights arrived before I did, but when I turned the corner and saw my wife standing there in handcuffs under the glare of patrol car lights, something inside me shifted permanently. He was still speaking loudly, still performing, still convinced that confidence equals control. But real authority does not shout, and real law does not wear costume badges. When the officers told him to step back, he hesitated just long enough to reveal the truth. He believed he was untouchable. The silence after they removed the cuffs felt heavier than the confrontation itself, because humiliation lingers longer than fear. And that night, our home did not feel like a sanctuary. It felt like evidence. What he did not understand, what the entire board did not understand, was that power borrowed from intimidation collapses the moment it meets accountability. They had written policies in private meetings, words like detainment, authority, as if language alone could bend reality. They thought approval votes were shields. They thought nobody would push back. But once the footage spread, once the documents surfaced, once the quiet phrases were projected in front of homeowners who had never agreed to any of it, the illusion cracked. Courtrooms are not loud the way arguments are. They are calm, controlled, and devastating. When the judge asked him what law gave him the right to arrest a resident, there was no speech, no performance, no vest to hide behind. Just silence. And silence is loud when you have been pretending to be powerful. The board tried to call it a misunderstanding. They tried to frame it as community safety, but safety does not come with handcuffs purchased from HOA dues. Safety does not humiliate. Safety does not improvise law. One by one, the resignations came. One by one, the defenses weakened. Insurance refused to protect intentional arrogance. And suddenly, the people who felt invincible were calculating personal liability. The apology was not dramatic. It was fragile. A voice shaking at a podium admitting trust had been broken. And trust once fractured does not return the same. Months later, the street looked unchanged. Same houses, same sidewalks, same trees lining the curb. But something invisible had shifted. Transparency replaced intimidation. Meetings became recorded. Authority became defined. And the house where the vest once hung by the door eventually went quiet. A for sale sign appeared like punctuation at the end of a sentence no one expected to write. He thought he was enforcing rules. He thought he was protecting property values. He thought power was something you could wear. But power without law is costume, and costume authority collapses under real light. If you think this was just neighborhood drama, wait until you see what happens when arrogance meets federal paperwork, when emails surface, when policies are read out loud in rooms that were never meant to hear them. Because the night my wife was placed in handcuffs was not the climax. It was the beginning. And what followed did not just change one household, it rewrote the rules of the entire community. You have seen the confrontation, you have felt the humiliation, but the next chapter is where reputations crumble, assets are threatened, and the illusion of control dissolves completely. Stay with me, because the real reckoning was never about revenge. It was about accountability. And accountability always arrives quietly, but it never leaves quietly.
The weeks after the arrest did not explode all at once. They tightened slowly, like a knot being pulled from both ends. At first, there were whispers at mailboxes, short conversations that stopped when we walked past, curtains that moved, just enough to remind us we were being watched again. But this time the curiosity was different. It was not gossip. It was calculation. People were replaying what they had witnessed and asking themselves how close they had come to being next. The footage circulated quietly, then rapidly. A doorbell camera from across the street, a cell phone recording from a teenager on the sidewalk, audio from the responding officer asking a simple question: what statute gives you that authority? There is something about hearing that question repeated that changes everything, because when you cannot answer it in real time, the silence becomes permanent. The HOA board scheduled an emergency meeting, not to apologize, not at first, but to control the narrative. They called it a clarification session. They called it community alignment. They called it restoring harmony. But harmony cannot be restored by rewriting memory. The room was full in a way it had never been full before. Chairs borrowed from neighbors, people standing along walls, phones recording openly. The president avoided eye contact. The vigilante avoided attendance entirely. Then someone asked the question that cracked the room in half. Who approved enforcement authority beyond fines? Papers shuffled, voices overlapped, minutes were referenced, votes were cited. And then the truth surfaced in plain language. No one had. There had been discussions, there had been suggestions, there had been ambition disguised as initiative, but there had never been legal approval. The attorney hired by the board tried to soften the edges. He used words like procedural misstep and individual overreach. He emphasized separation between the association and the actor. But intent leaves fingerprints, and emails do not forget. When internal messages were requested formally, the tone shifted overnight. Jokes about making examples, comments about teaching homeowners lessons, statements about maintaining dominance. Dominance. That was the word that ended their defense. Insurance investigators arrived quietly. Clipboards, legal pads, polite expressions. They asked whether the action had been authorized. They asked whether the board knew about prior confrontations. They asked whether anyone had warned against escalation. Each answer narrowed the protection window. One carrier letter later, and the message was clear. Intentional misconduct is not covered. You could feel the temperature change in the room after that, because this was no longer theoretical. This was personal liability. Assets, savings, retirement accounts. Power feels different when it threatens your own foundation. Meanwhile, my wife moved through the days with a steadiness that looked calm from the outside, but I could see the weight behind her eyes. She jumped at sudden knocks. She avoided walking alone after dusk, not because she feared him, but because trust had been fractured. Trust is invisible until it is broken. Then it is the only thing you can see. The district attorney reviewed the file longer than anyone expected. False imprisonment, impersonation, harassment. Each word carried consequence. The vigilante attempted to explain himself in a voluntary statement. He said he was protecting the neighborhood. He said he believed the board supported him. He said he acted in good faith. Good faith does not purchase handcuffs. Good faith does not override state law. When formal charges were filed, the notification did not come with sirens. It came in a plain envelope, but paper can be louder than lights. The board president resigned the same week, a brief email citing family reasons. No acknowledgement of responsibility, no admission of error, just departure. And yet departure does not erase record. At the preliminary hearing, the courtroom was quiet in a way that made every shuffle echo. The prosecutor did not raise their voice. They didn't need to. They played the clip. The moment the cuffs closed, the moment my wife said, "You cannot do this," the moment he responded, "I absolutely can." Confidence replayed in slow motion sounds different. It sounds hollow. His attorney argued misunderstanding. He argued community enforcement culture. He argued blurred lines. The judge responded with clarity. There are no blurred lines in unlawful detention. That sentence alone shifted leverage. Civil litigation followed naturally, not out of vengeance, but out of necessity. Medical consultation for emotional distress, security upgrades, lost professional time, reputational impact, each element documented, each receipt attached. The mediation attempt lasted 3 hours. Offers were presented, withdrawn, adjusted.
But apology without acknowledgement feels transactional, and transaction does not heal violation. The settlement that eventually emerged was substantial. Not dramatic, not theatrical, but undeniable. It required formal policy reform, mandatory training, independent oversight, public retraction, and financial accountability. When the agreement was read aloud the next community meeting, there was no applause, only relief. Relief that someone had drawn a line clearly enough that it could not be crossed again. The house with the tactical vest in the closet went on the market shortly after. No announcement, no farewell gathering, just a sign in the yard, and eventually an empty driveway. Some neighbors waved when we passed, some avoided eye contact, most simply carried on. But something had shifted permanently. Authority in the neighborhood now came with documentation. Meetings were recorded, votes were transparent, language was precise. Because once a community sees how quickly power can distort, it becomes harder to ignore small distortions. My wife planted flowers that spring along the edge of the driveway. Bright colors, deliberate, visible. Not as a statement, but as reclamation. Because home should never feel like a checkpoint, and community should never feel like surveillance. He thought he was enforcing order. He thought the vest gave him weight. He thought intimidation would protect structure. What he did not understand is that structure without legality collapses, and control without consent invites consequence. If you believe this story ends with a settlement, you are mistaken. Because the ripple effects reached further than one arrest, further than one resignation, further than one courtroom. Policies across neighboring communities were reviewed. Management companies issued guidance, attorneys circulated warnings. One reckless act forced dozens of associations to confront their own unchecked language. That is the thing about overreach, it exposes more than itself. And long after the headlines faded, long after the meetings returned to routine agendas, long after the flashing lights became memory, one truth remained solid. Power is not what you claim in the moment. Power is what survives scrutiny. He wore confidence like armor, but scrutiny pierced it effortlessly. And now when I walk past the driveway where it began, I do not see humiliation. I see a line that was drawn publicly, clearly and permanently. Some stories are about revenge. This one was about boundaries. And boundaries once defended reshape everything around them. What happened that night did not challenge one man. It challenged an entire culture of assumption. And that culture will never return to what it was. Because once accountability arrives, it does not ask permission to stay.